Welcome to Eternal Darkness, where nightmares come to life. I'll be your host through these twisted tales tonight. Before we descend into the shadows, remember to like and subscribe to join our growing community of horror enthusiasts. Get comfortable, turn down the lights, and prepare yourself as we begin our journey into the unknown. The sun was slipping below the horizon, painting the Texas sky in shades of rust and amber. The last rays of daylight cast long shadows across the narrow back road that wound through mesquite trees and prickly pear. I glanced at Annabeth beside me, her auburn hair catching the warm glow of twilight as she hummed along to the static-filled radio. We were headed back to the ranch after a supply run to town, taking the scenic route through the hill country, just me, her, and the old 2000 Chevy that had been through more adventures than I could count. The truck had belonged to my brother Miguel before he sold it to me 5 years ago when he moved to Houston. The odometer read over 200,000 miles, but the engine had always purred like a kitten, until tonight. Without warning, the engine coughed once, then twice, before sputtering into silence. The power steering went dead in my hands as I wrestled the wheel, guiding the truck to the shoulder. Dust swirled in the dying light as we rolled to a complete stop. "Damn it," I muttered, shifting into park. Annabeth's green eyes found mine, concern etching lines across her forehead. "What happened?" I shook my head, already reaching for the door handle. "No idea. She's never done this before." The hinges groaned as I stepped out into the cooling evening air. October in Texas meant the days were still warm, but the nights carried a bite that reminded you winter was coming. I popped the hood, the metal warm against my palms, and leaned into the engine compartment. Everything looked normal. The belt was intact. No visible leaks. Battery connections tight. I'd spent enough Saturday mornings under this hood with Miguel to know every bolt and wire by heart, but nothing seemed wrong. The forest pressed in around us on both sides of the road, dense with cedar and oak. As darkness crept through the branches, the shadows seemed to thicken into something almost solid. The usual evening chorus of crickets and tree frogs had gone silent, leaving only the ticking of the cooling engine. 5 minutes passed as I checked connections and fluid levels. Then I heard the passenger door creak open. Annabeth's boots crunched on the gravel as she came around to join me. "Did you call me?" Her voice carried an edge I'd rarely heard. I straightened up, wiping my hands on my jeans. "No, I didn't say anything." Her face went pale in the truck's dim dome light. She wrapped her arms around herself, that nervous gesture she'd had since we were kids. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees in an instant. I forced what I hoped was a reassuring smile. Probably just the wind playing tricks. These hills do strange things with sound. But even as I said it, I noticed how still the air had become. Not even a breeze stirred the leaves overhead. The forest felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something. "Get back in the truck," I said quietly. "Let me try starting it again." She nodded and climbed back into the cab, but I saw her lock the door behind her. Smart girl. I bent back over the engine, but my concentration kept breaking. Every snap of a twig in the underbrush made me jerk my head up. Every shadow seemed to shift and writhe just outside my vision. The feeling of being watched crawled across my skin like fire ants. Then I heard it. My own voice, distant but unmistakable, calling out, "Annabeth, Annabeth, come here." The blood in my veins turned to ice water. I spun around to see Annabeth already scrambling out of the truck again, her face twisted with fear and confusion. "Stop it," she shouted, her voice cracking. "This isn't funny anymore. I swear on my mother's grave I didn't." The words died in my throat as a low, rumbling growl rolled out of the darkness behind me. I turned slowly, every instinct screaming at me to run. A figure emerged from the shadows just beyond the reach of our headlights. At first glance it might have been a coyote. We had plenty of those in the hill country. But this was wrong, all wrong. It stood on legs that bent at impossible angles, joints reversed like a bird's. The body was covered in mangy fur that hung in patches, revealing skin underneath that looked burnt and scarred. Its head tilted at an unnatural angle as it studied us, and when the creature's mouth opened in what might have been a grin, I saw rows of human teeth behind the canine fangs. The eyes were the worst part. They glowed with their own sickly yellow light, reflecting our headlights like a cat's but holding an intelligence that no animal should possess. Annabeth's scream pierced the night as the thing moved. It didn't run like an animal. It lurched forward in stuttering, puppet-like motions that covered ground faster than should have been possible. One gnarled paw slammed into the truck bed with enough force to dent the metal. The whole vehicle rocked on its suspension. I saw Annabeth duck down inside, her hands pressed against her ears, eyes squeezed shut in terror. My hand found the door handle and yanked it open. In the center console was the knife old Hector had given me last summer. A wicked curved blade with a bone handle carved with symbols I didn't understand. He'd blessed it himself, said every rancher should carry protection in these parts. I'd thought he meant for cutting fence wire or putting down injured livestock. The creature's glowing eyes locked onto the blade, and for the first time, it hesitated. Its grotesque features twisted into something like fear. Then it spoke, and the sound that came out was Annabeth's voice, perfect in every way. Please, please don't hurt me. Rage exploded through my chest, burning away the fear. How dare this thing use her voice, try to manipulate me with it? I lunged forward, slashing with the knife. The blade caught the creature across what should have been its shoulder. The touch of blessed steel made it shriek, a sound that was part wounded animal, part woman's scream, part something else entirely. Black blood sprayed across the gravel. It stumbled backward, that horrible grin replaced by pure animal fury. For a heartbeat, we stared at each other. Then it turned and bolted into the forest, crashing through the underbrush. Its screams echoed off the hills until they faded into the distance. I stood there gasping, the knife trembling in my grip. My shirt was soaked with sweat despite the cool air. Annabeth called my name, her real voice small and frightened. I climbed back into the truck, tossing the bloodied knife onto the dashboard. My hands shook as I turned the key. The engine roared to life immediately, as if it had never been broken at all. Neither of us spoke during the drive home. I pushed the truck hard, taking the curves faster than was safe, desperate to put miles between us and whatever that thing had been. The headlights cut through the darkness, but I kept checking the mirrors, expecting to see those glowing eyes pursuing us. The ranch house appeared through the darkness like a beacon of safety. Every window blazed with light, unusual for this time of night. Hector's old Ford was parked out front next to his nephew's motorcycle. The front door opened before we even stopped. Hector stood silhouetted in the doorway, his weathered face grave. At 73, he'd been working this land longer than anyone else alive. The deep lines around his eyes seemed deeper tonight. Inside, quickly, he said, ushering us through the door. His nephew, Carlos, stood by the fireplace with a shotgun across his lap. How did you know? I started to ask, but Hector held up a gnarled hand. The land speaks to those who listen, he said simply. Tell me everything. Leave out nothing. We sat at the kitchen table while I recounted our encounter. Hector's face grew darker with each detail. When I described the creature's appearance and how it had used Annabeth's voice, he and Carlos exchanged a long look. Inaldlushi, Hector said finally, the unfamiliar words hanging heavy in the air. What some call a skinwalker, though that name gives it more power than it deserves. Annabeth gripped my hand under the table. Those are just old stories, she whispered. Old stories have roots in old truths, Carlos said. His voice was steady, but I noticed how his knuckles were white where he gripped the shotgun. My grandmother saw one when she was young. It killed 3 people in her village before the medicine man drove it away. Hector rose and began gathering supplies from the cupboards. Bundles of sage, pouches of ash, bottles of oil that gleamed amber in the lamplight. You wounded it with blessed steel. That's good. But it will remember you now. It will come for revenge. What do we do? I asked. We prepare. He began moving through the house, Carlos following. They spread ash across every windowsill and threshold. Sage smoke filled the rooms as Hector chanted in a language I didn't recognize. Not Spanish or English, something far older. He painted symbols above the doors with the oil, the marks seeming to shimmer in the flickering light. When he reached the bedroom where Annabeth and I would sleep, he spent extra time on the protection ritual. The knife I'd used was cleaned with salt and holy water, then blessed again with words that made the air feel charged, like before a thunderstorm. Keep her close, Hector said when he finished, his dark eyes boring into mine. These creatures feed on fear and isolation. Together you're stronger. Apart, he shook his head. Do not let it separate you. We tried to sleep, but every sound outside made us both tense. The house creaked and settled in the cooling night. Somewhere in the distance a pack of regular coyotes howled, and I wondered if they sensed what was out there too. The scratching started just after midnight. Slow, deliberate, like fingernails dragged across glass. It pulled me from the fitful doze I'd finally managed to fall into. My eyes snapped open to find Annabeth already awake, her body rigid beside me. The room was awash in silver moonlight filtering through the curtains. The shadows it cast seemed to move independently of any wind. "Did you hear?" she started to whisper. I pressed a finger to her lips and nodded. The scratching came again, from the window facing the back pasture. This time it was accompanied by a sound like breathing, deep, rhythmic, patient. "Stay here," I breathed into her ear, reaching for the blessed knife on the nightstand. Her fingers dug into my arm. "Don't leave me alone. I won't go far, I promise." I slipped out of bed and padded barefoot across the cold floor. The bedroom door opened silently. I'd oiled the hinges myself last month. The hallway stretched before me, patches of moonlight alternating with pools of shadow. Hector was already in the living room, standing motionless by the front windows. In his hands was the old Winchester that usually hung above the fireplace. Carlos flanked him with the shotgun. "It's testing the barriers," Hector murmured without turning. Looking for weakness, the scratching moved to another window, then another, circling the house. With it came new sounds, whispers and voices I almost recognized, soft laughter that raised goosebumps along my arms, the cry of what sounded like a baby that made my chest tighten with instinctive concern. "Don't listen," Carlos warned. "It's all lies. Everything it shows you, every sound it makes, all deception." Hector moved to the gun cabinet and withdrew a Glock 9mm, pressing it into my hands along with a leather pouch. "Iron bullets," he explained, "blessed and sealed with sacred salt. They may not kill it, but they'll hurt it enough to drive it off." The scratching stopped. The silence that followed was worse than any sound. We waited, muscles coiled like springs, scanning the darkness beyond the windows. Then I saw them through the window, hoof prints in the dirt of the yard, glowing faintly with their own phosphorescent light. They led from the garden toward the tree line, each print perfectly visible in the darkness. My gaze followed the trail to where it stood at the edge of our property. The skinwalker had taken a new form, or perhaps revealed more of its true nature. It stood upright like a man, but wrong too tall. Limbs too long, joints bending in ways that hurt to look at. Patches of fur and human skin created a patchwork hide. Its head was the worst amalgamation. Partly human, partly coyote, partly something else entirely. Those glowing eyes found mine through the window, and I felt a wave of pure hatred wash over me. But underneath it was something else. Pain from where I'd cut it, and a burning desire for revenge. I raised the Glock, sighting down the barrel through the glass. My finger found the trigger. Nothing. The gun was dead in my hands, the trigger frozen solid. I tried to rack the slide, but it was like the weapon had turned to stone. "The barriers hold it out," Hector said grimly, "but they also prevent us from attacking through them. We must face it directly." He moved toward the door, Carlos beside him. After a heartbeat, I followed. The night air hit like a physical blow. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees, and my breath came out in visible puffs. The skinwalker waited at the edge of the yard, just beyond the line of ash Hector had laid. Up close, its wrongness was even more apparent. The proportions were all off, arms that hung past its knees, a torso that seemed to twist and writhe even as it stood still. When it smiled, showing those human teeth in that bestial face, bile rose in my throat. "You think your little protections will save you?" Its voice was a horrible mixture of the ones it had stolen, Annabeth's sweetness, my own deeper tones, and underneath it all something ancient and cruel. "I have walked these lands since before your ancestors crawled from their caves. I have fed on the fear of generations." Hector stepped forward, the Winchester steady in his hands. He began to chant in that old language, each word seeming to make the air itself vibrate. The skinwalker's smile faltered. "Silence, old man. Your time is past. Your protections are weak, your faith failing. But Hector's voice only grew stronger. I could feel power building, making my skin tingle and my hair stand on end. The blessed ammunition in our weapons began to warm. The creature snarled and took a step forward. The moment its foot crossed the ash line, Hector fired. The crack of the rifle was deafening. The skinwalker screamed as the blessed bullet tore through its shoulder, spinning it around. Black ichor splattered across the ground, smoking where it hit. But it didn't fall. Instead, it laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You'll have to do better than that." It moved then, faster than anything that size should be able to. 1 second it was at the tree line. The next it was rushing toward us, covering the ground in bounds that defied physics. Carlos's shotgun boomed, catching it in the chest. It barely slowed. I finally got the Glock working. Whatever had frozen it broke when the creature crossed our threshold. I squeezed off 3 shots center mass. Each impact made it stagger but didn't stop its charge. Just as it reached us, claws extended and mouth open impossibly wide. Annabeth appeared in the doorway. "Stop," she shouted. The skinwalker froze mid-leap, its attention suddenly riveted on her. She stood there in her nightgown, clutching something in her hands. Her grandmother's silver cross, the one she never took off. "You have no power here," she said, her voice steady despite the tears running down her face. "This is our home, our land, and you are not welcome." The creature writhed as if in pain. The cross in Annabeth's hands began to glow with soft white light. Where that light touched the skinwalker, its skin bubbled and burned. It fell back, shrieking in rage and agony. "This isn't over," it screamed in a dozen stolen voices. "I know your scent now. I know your fears. I will feast on everyone you love." Then it fled, crashing back into the forest. Its howls echoed through the hills until they finally faded into silence. Dawn came slowly, painting the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold. None of us had slept after the confrontation. We sat around the kitchen table, cups of strong coffee growing cold in our hands. "It will come back," Hector said finally, wounded and angry. "They become more dangerous when cornered." "So what do we do?" Annabeth asked. She hadn't let go of my hand since the attack. "We need more protection, more people who know the old ways." Carlos was already making phone calls, speaking rapid Spanish to family members across the state. The knock at the door made us all jump. Through the window I could see Sheriff Daniel's patrol car in the drive. I opened the door to find him standing there, hat in hand, face drawn and pale. Daniel Rodriguez had been sheriff for 15 years. He'd seen everything from drug runners to human trafficking. But this morning, he looked shaken to his core. "We got a situation," he said, voice rough. "Your neighbor Eleanor Lowell, she's dead." The words hit like a physical blow. Mrs. Lowell lived 3 miles west, a widow who raised goats and made the best tamales in the county. Just last week, she'd brought us a basket of fresh eggs. "What happened?" My voice sounded distant to my own ears. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "That's the thing. Looks like she was shot, but the wounds, they're strange. And her house is torn apart like a tornado hit it, but only inside. Windows intact. Door was still locked from the inside." Hector stepped forward. "Were there tracks? Marks on the walls?" The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "How did you—" "Yeah. Claw marks everywhere. And this symbol drawn in blood above her bed." He showed us a photo on his phone. The symbol made my skin crawl, a twisted thing that seemed to writhe even in the still image. "It's marking territory," Hector said quietly, and sending a message. Daniel looked between us, understanding dawning on his face. "This is connected to those old stories, isn't it? The ones my grandmother used to tell?" "Your grandmother was wise," Carlos said. "You should have listened better." "What do I tell people? That there's a monster killing folks?" "Tell them there's a rabid animal," I suggested. "Mountain lion, maybe. Tell them to stay inside after dark, travel in groups." He nodded slowly. "The Hendersons reported missing cattle last night. Found them this morning. Or what was left of them. Whatever did it didn't eat them, just tore them apart." My stomach turned. It was killing for sport now, for terror. Each death would feed its power, spread fear through the community. "We'll stop it," I said. though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. After Daniel left, we spent the day preparing. More family arrived. Hector's sister Maria, a curandera from San Antonio, his cousin Roberto, who'd learned the old ways from their grandfather, a young woman named Luna who had the sight. They turned our ranch into a fortress. Every building was blessed and warded. Sacred symbols were carved into fence posts. They hung mirrors facing outward. Apparently the creatures hated their own reflection. Iron horseshoes appeared above every door. As the sun set, we were as ready as we could be. 15 of us now, armed with blessed weapons, and protected by centuries of knowledge. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it wouldn't be enough. They came at full dark. Not just one, but 3. The first sign was the cattle. They began lowing in distress, then screaming, a sound I'd never heard cattle make before. Through the window we could see them running in panic, crashing into fences, trampling each other to escape something we couldn't yet see. Positions, Hector commanded. We spread out through the house, weapons ready. I took the front window with Annabeth beside me. She held her grandmother's cross in one hand, and a borrowed .48 in the other. The temperature plummeted. Frost began forming on the windows despite the October warmth. Our breath came out in clouds. Then we saw them. 3 skinwalkers, each more grotesque than the last. One wore the partial skin of what might have been a horse, its head elongated into something equine but wrong. Another crawled on all 4s but with human hands and feet, its spine twisted so its head faced backward. The third wore Mrs. Lowell's face. It was stretched over its skull like a mask, her kind features warped into something monstrous. When it smiled, it was with her lips. "Murderers," it called in her voice. "You let me die. You could have warned me, could have saved me. Why didn't you save me?" "Don't listen," Luna said sharply. "It's not her. Just an echo, a stolen face." They circled the house, testing the barriers. Where they touched the protective symbols, sparks flew, and they recoiled. But they were learning, finding the weak points. The one with Mrs. Lowell's face began to speak in other voices. Friends, family members, people from town. Each accusation designed to hurt, to make us doubt ourselves. "Your brother never forgave you for letting him down," it said to Carlos in perfect Spanish. "Your baby would have lived if you'd been a better mother," it told Maria. To me it spoke in my father's voice. "Disappointed in you, boy. Always were too weak to protect what matters." "Shut up," Annabeth shouted, firing through the window. The blessed bullet caught it in the chest, sending it tumbling back. That's when they attacked in earnest. The horse thing charged the front door, hitting it with the force of a truck. The whole frame groaned. Roberto and 2 cousins braced it with their bodies, chanting prayers. The backward crawling one scuttled up the wall and onto the roof. We could hear it scratching at the shingles, trying to dig through. Windows shattered on 3 sides. Not from impact, from the creatures screaming. A sound that resonated at just the right frequency to explode glass. "Cover the windows," Hector ordered. We rushed to block the openings, but it was too late. The skinwalkers began reaching through, their arms stretching impossibly long. Claws raked at anyone within reach. Maria swung a machete blessed with holy water, severing one grasping arm. It fell to the floor and dissolved into black smoke that smelled of sulfur and rot. The front door finally gave way with a crash. The horse thing forced its way inside, too tall for the doorframe, having to bend and contort. Roberto met it with his shotgun, blessed rock salt tearing into its hide. The battle was chaos. Gunfire, screaming, the crash of furniture. Luna threw vials of consecrated oil that burst into white flame when they hit the creatures. The house filled with smoke, and the stench of burning flesh. I lost sight of Annabeth in the melee. Panic seized my chest. "Annabeth! Here!" She was backed into a corner, the Lowell-faced thing advancing on her. Her cross glowed, keeping it at bay, but barely. I charged, tackling the creature around the waist. We went down in a tangle of limbs. It was like wrestling with animated leather and bone. No muscle or substance beneath the stolen skin. Its hands found my throat, squeezing with inhuman strength. Black spots danced in my vision. Then Annabeth was there, pressing the cross against its forehead. The creature shrieked and released me, scrambling away from the holy symbol. "Everyone out," Hector shouted. "The house is lost." We retreated through the back door, covering each other. The skinwalkers had taken the living room, their presence fouling the air itself. But outside, we had room to maneuver. The yard became a battleground. Maria and her daughters formed a circle, chanting in unison. Their combined faith created a barrier of white light that the creatures couldn't cross. Roberto had retrieved something from his truck, an old leather bag filled with what looked like arrowheads. "Apache points," he explained quickly. "Found at a massacre site. They remember the blood spilled, the warriors who held them." He scattered them on the ground. Where they fell, ghostly figures rose, translucent warriors with bows and spears standing ready to defend. The skinwalkers recoiled. For the first time, real fear showed on their twisted features. "You dare call the dead against us?" The Lowell-faced one shrieked. "The dead who died with honor," Hector corrected. "The ones who knew how to fight your kind." The battle intensified. Ghost warriors clashed with skinwalkers. Our blessed bullets and the family's faith magic supported them. Slowly we gained ground. The backward crawler was the first to fall. Luna's thrown knife. A family heirloom blessed by 7 generations caught it in the spine. It collapsed, writhing, then began to dissolve. As it died, stolen voices poured from its mouth in a cacophony of pain. The horse thing tried to flee. Roberto's spectral warriors pursued. Their ghostly arrows finding marks our bullets couldn't. It made it to the tree line before collapsing, its stolen skin sloughing off to reveal something underneath that hurt to look at. Raw possibility, potential twisted into malevolence. That left the one wearing Mrs. Lowell's face. It stood in the center of the yard, no longer attacking, just watching us with those glowing eyes. "You think you've won?" it asked. And now the voice was its own ancient, cold, utterly inhuman. "I am eternal. I will return. If not in this form, then another. Your children will know my hunger. Their children will feed my rage." "Maybe," I said, stepping forward. The blessed knife was heavy in my hand. "But not today." "Not today," Annabeth echoed, moving beside me. One by one, the others joined us. 15 voices speaking as one. "Not today." The skinwalker laughed, but there was uncertainty in it now. We advanced together, faith and fury combined. It made one last desperate attack, launching itself at our line. But we were ready. Blessed weapons struck from every angle. Holy water sizzled against its flesh. Sacred smoke choked its cries. I drove the knife deep into its chest, Annabeth's hands over mine on the hilt. "For Mrs. Lowell," I whispered. The creature's eyes went wide. For just a moment I swear I saw something almost human in them. Regret, perhaps. Or simple exhaustion from centuries of existence. Then it collapsed, dissolving into shadow and smoke. The night wind caught the remains, scattering them until nothing remained but the memory. We stood there in the darkness, breathing hard, hardly believing it was over. "Is it dead?" Annabeth asked. "This form is," Hector said wearily. "But beings like this, their ideas as much as flesh. It may return years or generations from now. Then we'll be ready," I said. "We'll teach others. Make sure the knowledge doesn't die." He smiled slightly. "Now you understand." Dawn was breaking as we surveyed the damage. The house was wrecked, but standing. We'd lost cattle and property, but no human lives beyond poor Mrs. Lowell. As the sun rose higher, burning away the shadows, normalcy began to reassert itself. The ghostly warriors faded with respectful nods. The protective circles dimmed. The world looked ordinary again. But we knew better now. We'd seen what lurked in the darkness, faced it, and survived. Sheriff Daniel arrived with the sunrise, taking in the destruction with weary acceptance. "Mountain lion?" he asked without much hope. "Mountain lion," we agreed. He sighed. "I'll need statements, and someone should check on the other ranches, make sure everyone's okay." "We'll help," Maria offered. "This community protects its own." As the family dispersed to help with the cleanup and checking on neighbors, Annabeth and I found ourselves alone on the porch. She leaned against me, exhausted but alive. "Think it's really over?" she asked. I thought about lying, giving her the comfort of certainty. but we'd been through too much for that. For now, I said honestly. Maybe for our lifetime, but Hector's right. We need to remember to prepare. She nodded. Then we will. We sat there as the sun climbed higher, warming our faces and chasing away the last of the night's terrors. In the distance, I could hear the normal sounds of ranch life returning. Surviving cattle lowing for feed, horses nickering in their stalls, the dog barking at nothing in particular. The world went on, as it always had, but now we were part of the thin line that stood between the ordinary and the darkness. Guardians of knowledge that most would call folklore and superstition. And when the next one came, whether in a year or a century, someone would be ready with blessed steel and ancient words standing firm against the night. The sun rose fully, bathing the ranch in golden light, and for now, that was enough. Growing up in western Massachusetts, I always felt drawn to the mountains, especially the unforgiving peaks of New Hampshire's White Mountains. Mount Washington stood as the ultimate test, a granite beast infamous for unpredictable weather and punishing storms. Veterans of the trail spoke of conditions that could shift without warning, transforming clear skies into deadly blizzards within minutes. After completing my service as an Army combat medic, wilderness became my sanctuary. The silence of solo hikes provided therapy no counselor could match. Years of medical training in combat zones had prepared me for emergencies, but out here preparation meant survival. My pack always contained backup gear, redundant navigation tools, and enough supplies for unexpected delays. No social media updates marked my journeys. Just me, the elements, and the profound quiet of untouched wilderness. Early March brought favorable conditions for attempting the Presidential Traverse, a challenging winter trek across the Presidential Range peaks. Weather reports indicated mild conditions with minimal snowfall expected over the following days. Perfect for someone with my experience. Interesting enough to engage, safe enough to navigate. The route would take me from Mount Adams southward over Washington's summit. Years of studying topographical maps had burned every contour into memory. Emergency shelters dotted the range, though most were poorly marked and known only to search and rescue teams and experienced locals. Day 1 passed without incident. Crystal clear skies revealed stunning vistas across the snow-covered peaks. The physical exertion felt good, muscles working in familiar rhythm, breath steady in the thin mountain air. Camp that first night was peaceful, stars brilliant overhead in the unpolluted darkness. Morning of the second day began promisingly. I broke camp early, eager to cross the exposed alpine zone between Adams and Washington before afternoon weather moved in. By noon, however, the promised light flurries had transformed into something far more sinister. The temperature plummeted. Wind picked up suddenly, driving snow horizontally across the barren landscape. Within 30 minutes, visibility dropped to mere yards. The carefully placed cairns marking the trail disappeared beneath accumulating drifts. I pulled out my compass, checked my bearing, and pressed forward through knee-deep powder. 2 exhausting hours later, the dark outline of a structure materialized through the whiteout. The emergency warming hut sat exactly where my calculations predicted. A simple timber rectangle with a snow-laden roof, barely visible against the storm. The door hung slightly ajar, its latch broken by weather or previous visitors. Inside, darkness greeted me. My headlamp revealed a Spartan interior, rough timber walls, a metal cot bolted to the floor, and an old stone fireplace. I dropped my pack gratefully, muscles burning from the effort of fighting through deep snow. As I prepared to settle in, my light swept across the walls. The beam froze on deeply carved figures covering nearly every surface. Crude stick figures, bent and distorted, surrounded by taller shapes crowned with elaborate antlers. The carvings grew increasingly frantic toward the back wall, overlapping in chaotic patterns. Among the symbols I recognized Algonquian pictographs, ancient markings I'd seen in historical texts. One word appeared repeatedly, carved with desperate force: Wendigo. The name triggered memories of campfire stories shared by trail guides. An Algonquian legend of creatures born from starvation and cannibalism, forever hungry, stalking these mountains for centuries. I'd always dismissed such tales as folklore designed to spook novice hikers. Now alone in this crude shelter with these frantic warnings surrounding me, doubt crept in. I forced myself to focus on practical matters. Setting up my portable stove, I prepared a hot meal while trying to ignore how the carved figures seemed to shift in the flickering light. The storm intensified outside, wind battering the walls with increasing fury. Sleep came fitfully on the narrow cot, my knife within easy reach. Around midnight, a tremendous impact shook the back wall. I jerked upright, every nerve alert. Silence followed, broken only by my rapid breathing and the howling wind outside. A second impact, harder than the first, rattled the entire structure. No trees grew at this elevation. Nothing natural could strike the hut with such force. I gripped my knife tighter, straining to hear movement outside. Nothing. Just the relentless storm and the pounding of my heart. Dawn arrived after an eternity of watchful tension. Exhausted but unable to rest, I approached the door cautiously. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving an eerily quiet landscape buried under fresh snow. My footprints from the previous day had vanished completely, but new tracks circled the hut, impossibly large, deeply pressed into the powder. Each print showed 4 elongated toes tipped with claw marks, spaced wider than any animal native to these mountains. Returning inside, I discovered something that hadn't been there before. Fresh claw marks scored the inner surface of the door, long, deep gouges carved with tremendous force. Whatever made those tracks had been inside with me during the night. Panic threatened to overwhelm rational thought. I needed to leave immediately. Checking my compass, I noted the bearing toward Lakes of the Clouds hut and set out across the featureless terrain. An hour later, my stomach dropped. The warming hut loomed before me again. Impossible. I'd walked straight, following my compass religiously. Yet somehow, I'd circled back. I tried again, adjusting my course eastward. 20 minutes later, the hut reappeared. The landscape itself seemed to fold inward, trapping me in an endless loop. Each attempt to escape led inexorably back to this cursed shelter. As afternoon shadows lengthened and temperature dropped, I had no choice but to retreat inside once more. New carvings had appeared on the walls. A skeletal figure wearing a deer skull crown now dominated the space near the fireplace. Beneath it, 2 words were scratched deep into the wood. "Stay inside." Full darkness brought new terrors. As I sat vigilant on the cot, something scraped slowly across the roof. The sound was deliberate, methodical, heavy objects being dragged overhead. Then silence, pregnant with dread. Without warning, debris burst down through the chimney, scattering soot across the hearth. I grabbed my ice axe, aiming my headlamp upward. What I saw defied rational explanation. A pale skeletal hand extended down from within the chimney. Blackened fingernails scraped against stone as it reached lower. Above the hand, twisted antlers emerged from the shadows, far too large for the narrow flue. Training overcame paralysis. I grabbed my fuel canister, spraying its contents up into the chimney. The pungent chemical filled the air as I flicked my lighter and tossed it upward. Flames roared through the flue with explosive force. An inhuman shriek echoed from above as something heavy scrambled across the roof, retreating into the storm. I spent the remaining hours until dawn crouched against the far wall, axe ready, watching that chimney with unwavering attention. Morning brought profound relief. The oppressive atmosphere had lifted. Whatever force had trapped me here had withdrawn. My compass pointed true, and I wasted no time departing southward. An hour into my descent, orange jackets appeared through the morning haze, a search and rescue team ascending from Lakes of the Clouds. They wrapped me in thermal blankets, listening with professional skepticism as I recounted my experience. Hypothermic hallucinations, they concluded, though something in their eyes suggested they'd heard similar stories before. Later, safe in a valley hospital, the team leader visited privately. They'd returned to investigate the hut. Everything matched my description. The claw marks, the damaged chimney, bricks torn loose from inside the flue. The structure had been immediately sealed, added to a growing list of locations marked as hazardous. He advised me quietly, never to speak publicly about the incident. Some things, he suggested, were better left undiscussed. The mountains kept their secrets, and those who survived them learned to do the same. Months have passed since that night. I relocated far from mountains and snow, seeking warmth in populated areas. but some experiences leave permanent marks. In my closet, wrapped carefully in cloth, sits an ice axe still bearing soot stains from that desperate night, a reminder that ancient hungers still stalk the high places, waiting patiently for those who venture too far into their domain. The mountains call to me still, even now, but I've learned that some invitations should forever remain declined. In 1988, I found myself working as a ranger at Shenandoah National Park in Virginia. The name's Hank Reardon, and if you'd told me then what I'd encounter in those woods, I'd have laughed it off as a campfire tale. But sometimes, reality is far more terrifying than any story. I wasn't born to be a ranger. Hell, I stumbled into it after a brief, unremarkable career in construction. Swinging hammers wasn't my forte, and the promise of fresh air and open spaces lured me away from the cacophony of city life. 8 years into the job, I can say with certainty it's been both the best and worst decision I've ever made. Shenandoah National Park is a vast expanse of wilderness, over 200,000 acres of dense forest, winding rivers and trails that snake through the Blue Ridge Mountains. It's the kind of place where you can lose yourself in minutes if you don't know what you're doing. Luckily for me, I had a knack for navigation. Little did I know that this skill would be put to the ultimate test. The day everything changed started like any other. The crisp autumn air nipped at my face as I made my way to the ranger station. The leaves were just beginning to turn, painting the landscape in a riot of reds, oranges, and golds. It was the kind of day that reminded you why you chose this life, why you decided to make your office the great outdoors. As I entered the station, I noticed a flurry of activity. My colleague, Ranger Bill Hawkins, was on the phone, his brow furrowed in concern. He motioned for me to come over as he hung up. "We've got a situation, Hank," he said, his usually jovial face etched with worry. "A hiker's gone missing. College kid named Noah Hensley. He was last seen heading up the old Rag Mountain Trail yesterday afternoon. Didn't make it back to his campsite last night." I felt a knot form in my stomach. The old Rag Trail was notorious, even among experienced hikers. Steep, rocky, with treacherous scrambles that could turn deadly in bad weather or low light. And now we had an inexperienced kid lost up there. Any idea how prepared he was? I asked, already reaching for my gear. Bill shook his head. Not much. His friend said he had a small backpack with some water and snacks. No overnight gear, though. And get this, he went up there alone. I cursed under my breath. Solo hiking was risky enough for seasoned outdoorsmen, let alone a college kid probably more used to navigating campus quads than mountain trails. "All right," I said. "I'll head up there with Emma and Tom. We'll start at the trailhead and work our way up." Emma Garrison and Tom Huxley were two of our best. If anyone could find this kid, it was us. As I gathered my equipment, first aid kit, extra water, emergency blanket, radio, I couldn't shake an uneasy feeling. Something about this felt off, different from our usual search and rescue operations. Outside, the sky had darkened, heavy clouds rolling in from the west. A storm was brewing, both literally and figuratively. As we loaded up our gear and prepared to head out, I caught Emma's eye. She looked as unsettled as I felt. "You okay?" I asked. She nodded, but her eyes betrayed her uncertainty. "Yeah, I don't know. Something feels wrong about this one, Hank." I couldn't agree more, but I kept that to myself. No use in spreading more anxiety. "We'll find him," I said with more confidence than I felt. "Let's move out." As our vehicle wound its way up the mountain road towards the old Rag trailhead, I couldn't help but feel like we were heading into something far beyond our usual scope. The forest seemed to close in around us, the trees casting long shadows across the road. It was as if nature itself was trying to warn us, to keep us away from whatever was waiting for us up on that mountain. But we had a job to do, a life to save. And so, into the gathering gloom we went, unaware that we were about to face a horror beyond anything we could have imagined. The old Rag trailhead parking lot was eerily empty when we arrived. Usually, even on a weekday, you'd see a handful of cars belonging to day hikers or rock climbers. But today, there was only one vehicle, a beat-up Volkswagen Beetle that I assumed belonged to our missing hiker, Noah. As we geared up, I briefed Emma and Tom on our plan. We'll follow the main trail up to the first set of rock scrambles. That's about 3 miles in. If we don't find any sign of Noah by then, we'll split up and cover more ground. Keep your radios on at all times, and if anyone sees or hears anything unusual, call it in immediately." They nodded, their faces set with determination. We'd done search and rescue operations before, but something about this one felt different. The air was thick with an oppressive silence, broken only by the occasional gust of wind that sent leaves skittering across the ground. We set off up the trail, our boots crunching on the gravel path. The first mile was relatively easy, a gentle incline through a tunnel of trees. But as we climbed higher, the terrain became more challenging. The path narrowed, winding between massive boulders and along steep drop-offs. About 2 miles in, Tom held up a hand, signaling us to stop. "You smell that?" he asked, his nose wrinkled in disgust. I took a deep breath and immediately regretted it. A foul odor hung in the air, like rotting meat left out in the sun. It was unlike anything I'd encountered in my years as a ranger. Not the musky scent of a bear, or the pungent spray of a skunk. This was something else entirely. "Maybe an animal carcass nearby," Emma suggested, but her voice lacked conviction. I shook my head. "Let's keep moving, but stay alert." As we pressed on, the stench grew stronger. It seemed to cling to everything. The trees, the rocks, even our clothes. My stomach churned and I could see Emma and Tom were equally affected. We reached the first set of rock scrambles just as the sun began to dip behind the mountains. The fading light cast long shadows across the jumble of boulders, creating a maze of dark crevices and hidden recesses. "Noah," I called out, my voice echoing off the rocks. "Noah Hensley, can you hear us?" Silence. Then, carried on the wind, a sound that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It was faint, barely audible, but unmistakable, a low guttural growl. "Did you hear that?" Emma whispered, her eyes wide. Before I could respond, Tom's voice cut through the tension. "Over here! I found something." We scrambled over to where Tom was crouched behind a large boulder. There, half buried under a pile of leaves, was a torn backpack. The fabric was shredded, not in the way that would suggest it had caught on a branch or rock, but as if something had deliberately clawed it open. With gloved hands, I carefully turned the backpack over. The gashes in the fabric were deep, and around the edges of each tear was a dark, crusty substance that looked horribly like dried blood. "Jesus," Tom muttered. "What could have done this?" I shared a grim look with Emma. We'd seen our fair share of wildlife attacks, but this was different. The damage to the backpack was too deliberate, too vicious. "Radio it in," I told Emma. "Let them know we found what we believe to be Noah's pack, but no sign of him yet." As Emma made the call, I continued to examine the backpack. Inside, I found a half-empty water bottle, a granola bar wrapper, and a crumpled map of the trail. But it was what I found in the front pocket that sent a chill down my spine, a small notebook, its pages stained with what looked like blood and filled with frantic, barely legible writing. I flipped through the pages, my sense of dread growing with each word I read. Day 1. Decided to take a solo hike up Old Rag. Clear my head before finals. Should be back by nightfall. Day 2. Got turned around. Can't find the trail. It's getting dark. Thought I heard something moving in the woods. Probably just an animal. Day 3. Still lost. No food left. Water almost gone. The noises are getting closer. It's not an animal. Oh God, I saw it. What is that thing? It's not natural. If anyone finds this, please don't come looking for me. Run. Just run. The last entry trailed off into an illegible scrawl. I looked up at Emma and Tom, their faces pale in the fading light. "We need to get off this mountain," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Now." But even as the words left my mouth, I knew it was too late. From somewhere in the gathering darkness came that sound again, a low rumbling growl that seemed to vibrate through the very rock beneath our feet. Whatever had taken Noah was still out there, and now it was hunting us. The growl echoed off the rocks, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. We huddled together, our backs to a large boulder, eyes straining to penetrate the deepening gloom. "What the hell was that?" Tom whispered, his hand hovering near his service pistol. I shook my head. trying to quell the rising panic in my chest. In all my years as a ranger, I'd never encountered anything that made a sound like that. It wasn't a bear, wasn't a mountain lion. It was something else. "We need to move," I said, keeping my voice low. "Slowly and quietly. Back the way we came." Emma nodded, her face pale but determined. "What about Noah?" The weight of the decision pressed down on me. Our job was to find and rescue the missing hiker, but every instinct I had was screaming at me to get us off this mountain as fast as possible. "We're no good to him if we're dead," I finally said. "We'll come back with more people, better equipped." We began to inch our way back down the trail, every sense on high alert. The forest around us had gone eerily quiet, as if every living creature was holding its breath, waiting. We'd made it about 100 yards when Emma suddenly froze, her hand shooting out to grab my arm. "Look," she hissed, pointing to a spot just off the trail. At first, I didn't see anything. Then, as my eyes adjusted, I saw it. A set of tracks in the soft earth. But these weren't any animal tracks I'd ever seen before. They were huge, easily twice the size of a bear print, with long, curved claw marks gouging deep into the soil. "What kind of animal makes tracks like that?" Tom asked, his voice trembling slightly. Before I could answer, a branch snapped somewhere in the darkness to our right. We all whirled toward the sound, flashlights cutting through the gloom. For a split second, I saw it. A massive shape, hunched and twisted, its skin a mottled patchwork of fur and scales. But it was the eyes that froze the blood in my veins, glowing orbs of malevolent intelligence, fixed directly on us. Then it was gone, melting into the shadows with impossible speed for something so large. "Run," I yelled, all thoughts of stealth forgotten. We took off down the trail, branches whipping at our faces, roots threatening to trip us with every step. Behind us, I could hear it crashing through the underbrush, gaining on us with terrifying speed. Emma was in the lead, her years of trail running paying off as she nimbly navigated the treacherous path. Tom and I were right behind her, our lungs burning with the effort. Suddenly, Tom's foot caught on a root, sending him sprawling. I skidded to a stop, reaching down to haul him to his feet. But as I did, I saw it again, the creature, barely 20 yards behind us, its massive jaws open in a silent roar. Time seemed to slow. I saw every detail with horrifying clarity. The rows of jagged teeth, the saliva dripping from its mouth, the muscles bunching under its misshapen hide as it prepared to pounce. In that moment, I knew we were going to die. Then, from somewhere ahead came the crack of a gunshot. The creature reared back, letting out a shriek that was part animal, part something much worse. "Come on," Emma shouted. She had doubled back, her service pistol in hand. We didn't need to be told twice. We ran, harder than I've ever run in my life, the sound of the creature's enraged howls spurring us on. We burst out of the tree line into a small clearing. In the center stood an old fire tower, its metal structure silhouetted against the night sky. "Up there," I gasped, pointing to the tower. "It's our only chance." We scrambled up the rusted metal ladder, the creature's roars growing closer with each passing second. As we reached the small platform at the top, I looked down. The creature burst into the clearing, its massive form illuminated by the pale moonlight. It circled the base of the tower, those terrible eyes fixed on us. For hours we huddled in that tower, watching as the thing below paced and snarled, occasionally hurling itself at the metal struts in a frenzy of claws and teeth. As the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, the creature finally slunk back into the forest, but not before fixing us with one last hate-filled glare. We waited another hour before finally descending, our bodies stiff and sore, our minds struggling to process what we'd seen. As we made our way back down the mountain, I knew that nothing would ever be the same. We had seen something that shouldn't exist, something that defied explanation. And I knew with a certainty that chilled me to my core that this was only the beginning. The journey back to the ranger station was a blur of exhaustion and frayed nerves. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves sent our hearts racing. By the time we stumbled into the station, the sun was high in the sky, casting an incongruously cheerful light on our haggard faces. Chief Ranger Mike Callahan took one look at us and ushered us into his office, closing the door behind him. "What the hell happened out there?" he demanded, his gruff voice tinged with concern. For a moment, none of us spoke. How could we possibly explain what we'd seen? Who would believe us? Finally, I cleared my throat. Mike, we found evidence that Noah Hensley was attacked. His backpack was torn to shreds. There was blood. Mike's face paled. And Noah, I shook my head. No sign of him. But there was something else out there. Something. I trailed off, unable to find the words. Emma stepped in. Chief, we saw tracks, like nothing I've ever seen before, and we heard noises. It chased us. Chased you? Mike's eyebrows shot up. What chased you? A bear? Tom let out a bitter laugh. I wish it had been a bear. This was something else, Chief. Something not natural. Mike looked at each of us in turn, his expression a mix of disbelief and growing unease. All right, he said finally. I want full reports from each of you. Every detail, no matter how small or unbelievable. In the meantime, I'm calling in additional support from the state police and Fish and Wildlife. Whatever's going on up there, we need to get to the bottom of it. As we left Mike's office, the reality of what had happened began to sink in. We had gone up that mountain as seasoned professionals, confident in our abilities to handle whatever nature threw our way. We had come back changed, our worldview shattered by an encounter with something that defied explanation. The next few days passed in a haze of debriefings, search parties, and sleepless nights. More rangers and state police combed the area where we had encountered the creature, but found nothing conclusive. No tracks, no fur, no sign of Noah Hensley or the thing that had taken him. It was as if the mountain itself was conspiring to hide the truth. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Even in the safety of the ranger station, I found myself jumping at shadows, my hand instinctively reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. Emma and Tom were no better off. I could see the haunted look in their eyes, the way they flinched at sudden noises. A week after our encounter, Chief Callahan called us into his office again. The circles under his eyes spoke of sleepless nights and mounting pressure from above. I've got the state breathing down my neck, he said without preamble. They want answers, and frankly, so do I. Your reports? He trailed off, shaking his head. If it was anyone else, I'd say you were pulling my leg, or that you'd all gone crazy. But I know you three. You're the best rangers I've got. He leaned forward, his voice dropping. Off the record, what do you think we're dealing with here? I exchanged glances with Emma and Tom. We talked about this amongst ourselves, trying to rationalize what we'd seen. But in the end, there was only one conclusion we could draw. Chief, I said slowly, I know how this is going to sound, but I think we're dealing with something not of this world, something that shouldn't exist. Mike leaned back in his chair, his face unreadable. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, to my surprise, he nodded. I was afraid you'd say that, he said quietly. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a dusty file folder. What I'm about to show you doesn't leave this room, he said, his voice deadly serious. If anyone asks, this conversation never happened. Understood? We nodded, a sense of dread building in the pit of my stomach. Mike opened the folder and spread out a series of old photographs and reports. They were yellowed with age, some dating back to the 1950s. As I leaned in for a closer look, my blood ran cold. There, in grainy black and white, was a creature that looked disturbingly similar to what we had seen. The image was blurry, clearly taken in haste, but there was no mistaking the elongated limbs, the mottled skin, the gaping maw filled with razor-sharp teeth. What is this? Emma whispered, her voice shaking. Mike sighed heavily. It's a history we've tried to keep buried. Every few decades, something happens in these mountains. Hikers go missing. Animals are found mutilated. And there are sightings. Reports of something that doesn't belong. He shuffled through the papers. 1953, 1976, 1988. Now, always the same pattern. It appears, causes havoc for a few weeks or months, then vanishes without a trace. Why haven't we heard about this before? Tom demanded. His face flushed with anger. We should have been warned. Mike held up a hand. It was classified, need-to-know basis only. And frankly, until now, I thought it was all bullshit. Ghost stories to scare the newbies. He looked at each of us in turn, his expression grim. But now Now I'm not so sure. Whatever this thing is, it's back. And if history is any indication, it's going to get worse before it gets better. As I left Mike's office that day, my mind reeling from what I'd learned, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were standing on the precipice of something monumental. Something that would change not just our lives, but our understanding of the world itself. Little did I know our encounter on the mountain was just the beginning. The real horror was yet to come. The weeks following our revelation in Mike's office were tense, to say the least. The official story was that Noah Hensley had fallen victim to a tragic hiking accident, possibly involving a bear or mountain lion. Search efforts were scaled back, then eventually called off entirely. Noah's family was devastated, of course, but they accepted the explanation. After all, what other possibility was there? But for those of us who knew the truth, there was no peace. Every day brought a new wave of anxiety, wondering if today would be the day the creature struck again. We increased patrols, especially in the areas near Old Rag Mountain, but found nothing out of the ordinary. As September gave way to October, a fragile sense of normalcy began to return to the park. The autumn colors were in full swing, drawing leaf peepers from all over the country. Campgrounds filled up, hiking trails bustled with activity, and for a while it seemed like maybe, just maybe, the nightmare was over. I should have known better. It was a crisp Friday morning in late October when the call came in. A group of campers in the Big Meadows area had reported strange noises in the night, followed by the discovery of several mutilated deer carcasses near their campsite. As I drove out to the scene with Emma, the knot in my stomach tightened. We both knew what this could mean, but neither of us wanted to say it out loud. The campsite was a scene of barely controlled chaos when we arrived. Park police had already cordoned off the area, and a small crowd of curious onlookers had gathered at the perimeter. I could see the fear and confusion on their faces. They had come here for a peaceful communion with nature, not this. We made our way to where the carcasses had been found, just beyond the tree line bordering the meadow. The smell hit me first, that same rotting, fetid odor we had encountered on Old Rag. Then I saw them. 3 deer lay in a rough semicircle, their bodies torn apart with savage efficiency. But it wasn't the gore that chilled me to the bone. It was the precision. These weren't random animal attacks. The carcasses had been arranged deliberately, almost ritualistically. As Emma and I examined the scene, cataloging evidence and taking photographs, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end, and more than once I caught myself whirling around, certain I had seen movement in the shadows between the trees. But there was nothing there. Nothing we could see, anyway. As we finished up and prepared to head back to the station, Emma grabbed my arm. "Hank," she said, her voice low and urgent, "look at this." She pointed to a nearby tree. There, carved into the bark about 7 feet up, was a symbol. It looked like a crude stick figure, but with too many limbs, its head a distorted oval with what looked like tentacles sprouting from it. "Jesus," I muttered. "What the hell is that supposed to be?" Emma shook her head, her face pale. "I don't know, but I've got a real bad feeling about this, Hank. Whatever this thing is, I think it's trying to send a message." I nodded grimly. "Yeah, and I think I know what that message is. I'm back and I'm hungry." As we drove back to the station, the sun dipping below the horizon and casting long shadows across the road, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were entering a new phase of this nightmare. The creature wasn't just hunting anymore. It was playing with us, taunting us. And somehow I knew that this was just the opening move in a game we weren't prepared to play. The next 2 weeks were a blur of increased patrols, sleepless nights, and mounting tension. More reports trickled in. Hikers hearing strange noises, campers finding their sites ransacked, more mutilated animals discovered in remote areas of the park. We did our best to keep a lid on things, to prevent panic from spreading. But rumors have a way of growing, especially in small communities. Whispers of a monster in the woods began to circulate among the locals. Tourism started to drop off, despite the peak colors of autumn. It was a Tuesday evening when everything came to a head. I was just finishing up my shift, looking forward to a rare night off, when the call came in. A family of 4 had gone missing from their campsite in the Lewis Mountain area. Their tent was found slashed open, signs of a struggle evident, but no blood or bodies. As I raced to the scene with a team of rangers and state police, I knew in my gut that this was it. Creature had escalated from animals to humans. The game, as it were, was truly on. The campsite was a scene of controlled chaos when we arrived. Floodlights had been set up, casting harsh shadows across the clearing. Forensic teams combed the area, collecting evidence and taking photographs. But even from a distance, I could see the fear in their eyes. They knew this was no ordinary missing persons case. I made my way over to where Chief Callahan was conferring with a state police detective. Mike's face was grim as he filled me in on the details. Family of 4, parents and 2 kids, ages 8 and 12, he said, his voice low. No sign of them anywhere, but we found this. He handed me a plastic evidence bag. Inside was a scrap of paper, torn and blood-stained. On it, in childish handwriting, were the words, "The stick man came. He's taking us to his home." I felt the blood drain from my face. "The stick man," I muttered. "Like that symbol we found carved in the tree." Mike nodded. "Whatever this thing is, it's getting bolder. We need to end this, Hank, tonight." I looked at him, surprised. "What are you suggesting?" He glanced around, making sure no one was within earshot. "I've got a team assembling. Best trackers, best shots. We're going hunting." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Mike, you can't be serious. We don't know what we're dealing with here. It's too dangerous." He fixed me with a hard stare. "And leaving that family out there with that thing isn't dangerous?" We swore an oath, Hank. To protect and serve. That's what we're going to do. I knew there was no talking him out of it. And deep down, I knew he was right. We couldn't just sit back and wait for more people to disappear. "All right," I said finally. "I'm in. But we do this smart. No heroes, no lone wolves. We stick together, watch each other's backs." Mike nodded, a grim smile on his face. "Wouldn't have it any other way. Gear up. We move out in 30 minutes. As I went to prepare, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into something far beyond our understanding or capability. But we had no choice. The creature had thrown down the gauntlet, and we had to respond. Little did I know, as we geared up and prepared to venture into the dark heart of Shenandoah, that we were about to face a horror beyond anything we could have imagined. The true nature of the beast was about to be revealed, and nothing would ever be the same again. The night was oppressively dark as our team of 12, a mix of rangers and state police, set out from the Lewis Mountain campground. The moon was a mere sliver in the sky, offering little illumination as we made our way along the overgrown trail. We moved in silence, communicating with hand signals and the occasional whispered word. The weight of our mission hung heavy in the air. Somewhere out there, a family was in mortal danger, if they were even still alive, and the thing that had taken them was waiting. I was on point, my years of experience in these woods guiding our path. We had decided to follow a series of caves and rock formations that honeycombed this part of the park. If the creature had a lair, it was likely to be in one of these. About 2 hours into our trek, Emma, who was bringing up the rear, suddenly held up a hand, signaling us to stop. We froze, every sense on high alert. For a long moment there was nothing but the normal sounds of the forest at night. Then I heard it, a low, keening wail that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was a sound of pure anguish, not quite human, but not entirely animal either. "What the hell was that?" one of the state troopers whispered, his voice shaking. Before anyone could answer, the wail came again, louder this time. And now I could tell where it was coming from. Up ahead, near a large rock formation we locals called the Devil's Backbone. Mike signaled for us to move forward, his face set in grim determination. As we approached the rock formation, the wailing grew louder, more frantic. It was joined by other sounds, a rhythmic chanting in a language I didn't recognize, and underneath it all, a low rumbling growl that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. We rounded a bend in the trail and suddenly, there it was. The mouth of a cave, previously hidden by the twisting path, yawned before us. A sickly green light pulsed from within, casting writhing shadows on the rock face. The sounds were definitely coming from inside. As we watched, transfixed, a figure emerged from the cave. For a moment I thought it was human. Then it stepped into the moonlight, and I had to bite back a scream. It was vaguely humanoid, but that's where the resemblance ended. Its body was emaciated, skin stretched tight over an impossible frame. Multiple limbs, I counted at least 6, sprouted from its torso at odd angles. But it was the face that would haunt my nightmares for years to come. Where there should have been features, there was only a writhing mass of tentacles surrounding a gaping maw filled with rows of needle-sharp teeth. The thing paused at the entrance to the cave, its head swiveling in our direction. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my core, that it had sensed us, that we were no longer the hunters, but the hunted. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then all hell broke loose. The creature let out a shriek that seemed to pierce right through my skull. As one, we opened fire, the sound of gunshots echoing off the rocks. But our bullets seemed to have little effect. The thing moved with impossible speed, darting between the trees and rocks. "Fall back," Mike yelled, but it was too late. The creature was among us, its limbs lashing out with terrifying strength and speed. I saw a state trooper go down, his chest caved in by a single blow. Emma was thrown against a tree, her head hitting the trunk with a sickening crack. I fired and fired, my pistol clicking empty. But the thing just kept coming. In the chaos, I lost track of the others. I could hear screams, gunshots, the wet sound of tearing flesh, and above it all, that terrible shrieking, now tinged with what sounded horribly like laughter. I don't know how long the battle lasted. It could have been minutes or hours, but eventually I found myself alone, my back pressed against the cold stone of the devil's backbone. My ammunition was spent, my radio smashed. In the distance I could hear the fading sounds of combat, but they were growing weaker by the moment. And then, emerging from the shadows like a nightmare given form, came the creature. It moved slowly now, almost languidly, as if savoring the moment. Those writhing tentacles on its face seemed to reach out towards me, probing the air. As it drew closer, I realized with a start that it was speaking. The words were garbled, as if it was struggling with an unfamiliar tongue, but I could make out what it was saying. "You should not have come." I closed my eyes, waiting for the end, but it didn't come. Instead, I felt a presence in my mind, an alien intelligence probing my thoughts. Images flashed before my closed eyes. Vast, cyclopean cities beneath the sea, strange beings moving between the stars. Rituals performed in dark places that had never known the light of day. And I understood. This thing, this creature, was not of our world. It was something ancient. Something that had existed long before humans walked the earth. And it had been waiting, sleeping, until we foolish mortals had stumbled upon its resting place. When I opened my eyes, the creature was gone. In its place stood a shimmering portal, a tear in the very fabric of reality. Through it I could see glimpses of a world beyond my comprehension, a place where the laws of physics as we knew them didn't apply. Impossible geometries and colors that shouldn't exist swirled in a maddening dance. And there, at the threshold of this impossible doorway, stood the missing family. Their eyes were blank, unseeing, their bodies moving with a jerky, puppet-like motion. As I watched in horror, they stepped through the portal, vanishing into that alien realm. I wanted to scream, to run after them, to do something, but my body wouldn't respond. I was frozen in place, my mind reeling from what I had seen and understood. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the portal winked out of existence. The forest was plunged into darkness once more, the only sound my own ragged breathing. I don't know how long I sat there, my back pressed against the cold stone. It could have been minutes or hours, but eventually I heard voices calling my name. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness, and I saw figures moving towards me. It was a search party, led by rangers who hadn't been part of our ill-fated expedition. They found me babbling incoherently about tentacles and portals and impossible cities. They found the bodies of my companions, torn and broken in ways that defied explanation. But of the creature there was no sign. No trace of the portal. No evidence of the missing family. It was as if the entire nightmare had been a collective hallucination. In the days and weeks that followed, I tried to piece together what had happened, but the more I thought about it, the more it slipped away, like trying to hold on to the details of a dream upon waking. The official report cited a bear attack. It was easier, safer to blame it on something familiar, something we could understand. The missing family was declared dead, lost to the unforgiving wilderness. But I knew the truth, and that truth would haunt me for the rest of my days. It's been years since that night in Shenandoah National Park. I left the ranger service not long after, unable to face the forest that had once been my home. The nightmares, when they come, are still vivid, tentacles reaching out from the darkness, that alien intelligence probing my mind. The sight of that family stepping through the portal into a reality I couldn't comprehend. I've spent countless hours researching, trying to make sense of what we encountered. I've delved into ancient myths and legends, studied fringe theories about interdimensional beings and hidden realities. And the more I learn, the more I realize how little we truly understand about the world around us. There have been other incidents over the years, strange sightings in remote areas, unexplained disappearances, reports of creatures that shouldn't exist. Each time, I wonder if it's happening again, if that ancient horror has awakened once more. I've tried to warn people, to share what I know, but who would believe me? To most, I'm just a crazy old ex-ranger, spinning tales to scare the tourists. Even those who were there that night, who survived the encounter, have convinced themselves it was something else. A bear, a mountain lion, mass hysteria, anything but the truth. But I know what I saw. I know what's out there waiting in the dark places of the world. And I know that one day it will return. Sometimes on quiet nights when the wind whispers through the trees, I find myself looking towards the mountains. I think about that family, lost in a realm beyond our understanding. I wonder if they're still alive, in some incomprehensible way. And I wonder if, someday, they'll find their way back. But then I remember the creature, its tentacled face and impossible form. And I pray that the barrier between our worlds remains unbroken. Because if it doesn't, if that thing, or others like it, find their way into our reality again, then God help us all. As I sit here writing this account, I can't help but feel a sense of urgency. The world needs to know, needs to be prepared. But how do you prepare for something so far beyond our understanding? All I can do is share my story and hope that someone somewhere will believe. And maybe, just maybe, when the time comes, we'll be ready. But in my heart, I know the truth. We'll never be ready. Not for this. Not for the horrors that lurk just beyond the veil of our reality. So to anyone reading this, I offer this warning. Be careful in the wild places of the world. Respect the darkness, the unknown. And if you ever find yourself in Shenandoah National Park, keep your eyes open and your wits about you. Because sometimes the monsters in the woods are all too real. And they're hungry. I should be sitting on my couch right now, complaining about my neighbor's music being too loud. Instead, I'm writing this account with trembling hands, trying to make sense of what happened in Jefferson National Forest. The doctors call it trauma-induced PTSD. The rangers filed it as an animal attack. But I know what I saw, and I need to tell this story, if only to preserve my sanity. My name is Bobby Jenks. 3 weeks ago, I was just another corporate accountant from Kansas City, more comfortable with spreadsheets than sleeping bags. I lived a predictable life. Wake up, commute, crunch numbers, come home, repeat. The most exciting part of my day was usually deciding what to order for lunch. Then my cousin Joel suggested we take an RV trip to Virginia. "It'll do you good, Bobby," he said over beers at Kelly's Bar and Grill, his usual hangout whenever he visited Kansas City. Clear your head after everything that happened with Michelle. He wasn't wrong about needing a change. The breakup with Michelle had hit me harder than I'd admitted to anyone. 3 years together ended by a text message in a moving truck while I was at work. Then came the insomnia, the anxiety attacks, the quiet concern from coworkers when they thought I couldn't hear them whispering. My performance reviews had started slipping. Even my boss had suggested I take some time off. Joel was different from me in every way that mattered. Where I was cautious, he was bold. Where I planned, he improvised. He'd spent the last decade working as a wilderness guide in Colorado, leading rich tourists on hunting expeditions and camping trips. He had the kind of confidence that came from knowing exactly who you were and what you could do. When he spoke, people listened. So when he proposed this trip, a week in Jefferson National Forest, just the two of us in an RV, I found myself saying yes before I could think of all the reasons to say no. "Trust me," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. A week in the wilderness will reset your whole system. No cell phones, no emails, no drama. Just you, me, and Mother Nature. Mother Nature, as it turned out, had other plans. We picked up the RV in Richmond on a sunny Tuesday morning. It was smaller than I'd expected, more like a large van than the mobile homes I'd seen on TV, but Joel assured me it would be perfect for our needs. He went through the rental paperwork with practiced ease while I loaded our supplies. Enough food for a week, first aid kits, emergency flares, and all the camping gear Joel had insisted we bring. The drive to Jefferson National Forest took about 3 hours. I watched through the passenger window as the urban landscape gradually gave way to rolling hills and dense forests. Joel filled the time with stories about his guiding adventures, close calls with bears, clients who showed up in designer boots, the time he had to lead an emergency evacuation during a flash flood. The thing about nature, he said, navigating a particularly sharp turn, is that it demands respect. These city folks, they come out here thinking it's like a theme park. But out here, you're not at the top of the food chain anymore. You're just another animal trying to survive. I nodded, pretending his words didn't make my stomach clench. We'd been close as kids, but life had pulled us in different directions. Sometimes I wondered if he saw me the same way he saw his clients. Another soft city dweller who needed to be taught the ways of the wild. The campground was primitive by RV park standards. No hookups, no Wi-Fi, just a clearing big enough for a few vehicles and a weathered sign marking the trailhead. Joel backed the RV into position with practiced ease, and we spent the rest of the daylight hours setting up camp. He showed me how to secure the awning, where to store food to avoid attracting animals, and the basics of fire safety. That first night was actually pleasant. We grilled hamburgers over a campfire, shared a few beers, and talked about old times. The stars came out in force, more than I'd ever seen in Kansas City, and the night air was filled with the gentle sounds of crickets and distant owls. "See," Joel said, stoking the fire. "This is what you've been missing. No phones, no computers, just this." He gestured at the sky, then grinned. "Though I bet you're already going through Excel withdrawal." I threw a marshmallow at him, and we both laughed. It felt good. Familiar. Like when we were kids spending summers at our grandparents' farm in Oklahoma, before life got complicated. The next 2 days fell into a comfortable routine. We'd wake early, make breakfast over the campfire, then spend the day exploring the nearby trails. Joel taught me the basics of fishing, though I proved to be spectacularly bad at it. We saw deer, wild turkeys, and once, from a safe distance, a black bear with 2 cubs. Each encounter made my heart race, but Joel's calm presence kept my anxiety in check. Then came Thursday, and everything changed. The morning started like the others. We had our usual breakfast of instant coffee and oatmeal, packed our day packs, and studied the trail map. Joel had been talking about Devil's Backbone since we arrived, a rocky ridge that offered panoramic views of the surrounding wilderness. "It's a bit of a climb," he admitted, tracing the route with his finger, "but the view is worth it. Plus, hardly anyone goes up there. We'll have the whole place to ourselves." Looking back, I should have paid more attention to that last part. The trail started easily enough, winding through stands of oak and hickory trees. The morning air was cool, and the forest was alive with bird song. Joel set a steady pace, pointing out interesting plants and animal tracks as we walked. I tried to pay attention, but my mind kept wandering to my office, to Michelle, to all the things I'd left behind. About 2 hours in, the trail began to change. The well-maintained path gave way to something more primitive, barely more than a game trail in places. The trees grew closer together, their branches forming a dense canopy that blocked most of the sunlight. The air became noticeably cooler, and the cheerful birdsong faded away. Joel noticed it first. He stopped so suddenly I almost ran into him. "Bobby," he said quietly. "Listen." I stopped, catching my breath. "Listen to what?" "Exactly." His eyes scanned the surrounding forest. "It's too quiet." He was right. The forest had gone completely silent. No birds, no insects, not even the rustle of leaves in the wind. It was as if someone had hit a mute button on the world. "Maybe it's just, I don't know, the time of day," I suggested, trying to keep the unease out of my voice. Joel shook his head. Animals don't just go quiet for no reason. Something spooked them. A bear? Maybe. But he didn't sound convinced. Let's keep moving. Stay close. We continued up the trail. But the silence seemed to press in around us. The trees looked different now, their trunks twisted into strange shapes, their branches reaching out like grasping fingers. More than once I could have sworn I saw movement in the shadows, but when I turned to look, there was nothing there. The temperature kept dropping, even though it was mid-afternoon. Our breath began to fog in the air, and I pulled my jacket tighter around me. Joel's earlier confidence seemed to have evaporated. He moved more cautiously now, stopping frequently to listen and scan our surroundings. Then we heard it. The sound started as a low vibration, more felt than heard. It grew into a deep, resonant tone that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It wasn't like any animal I'd ever heard. Not a growl, not a roar, but something else entirely. Something wrong. Joel grabbed my arm. We need to go. Now. We turned back the way we'd come. But nothing looked familiar. The trail seemed to twist and branch in ways it hadn't before, leading us deeper into the increasingly dense forest. The sound came again, closer this time, and with it came a smell, like rotting meat in stagnant water. We started running. The terrain was treacherous, roots and rocks threatening to trip us with every step. The forest seemed to be closing in around us, the trees pressing closer, their branches reaching down to snag our clothes and scratch our faces. We burst into a small clearing, our lungs burning. The trees formed a perfect circle around us, their branches weaving together overhead like a cage. Joel pulled out his map with shaking hands, but I could see in his eyes that he already knew we were lost. The sound came again, this time accompanied by movement at the edge of the clearing. At first I thought it was just shadows playing tricks on my eyes. The forest was already growing dark, though my watch said it was only 3:45 p.m. Then I saw it, and my world shifted permanently. It emerged from between two ancient oaks, moving in a way that denied every law of nature I knew. Its limbs were too long, jointed in impossible places, covered in what looked like bark but moved like skin. The creature stood easily 9 feet tall when fully upright, though it seemed to prefer a hunched posture that made it blend with the surrounding trees. But its face, God, its face. The closest comparison I can make is to a horse's skull, but that doesn't capture the wrongness of it. The jaw extended too far, lined with teeth that looked like yellowed needles. It had eyes, though I wish I could say it didn't. They were human eyes, intelligent and aware, set deep in that impossible skull. "Bobby," Joel whispered. "When I say run, you run. Don't look back, don't stop, just run." "Joel, no. Promise me." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. The creature tilted its head at our exchange, almost curious. That's when I noticed it had been hurting us. Each time it appeared, each sound it made had been pushing us exactly where it wanted us. Joel must have realized it too. He reached slowly into his pocket and pulled out his emergency flare. The creature watched, its head weaving slightly like a cobra tracking its prey. "Run." Joel lit the flare and threw it directly at the creature. The clearing erupted in harsh red light. The thing recoiled, emitting a shriek that made my teeth vibrate. I ran. The forest was a blur. Branches whipped at my face. Roots tried to trip me, but I kept running. Behind me, I heard Joel's scream, cut terribly short. The sound that followed, the wet tearing noise, will haunt me until the day I die. I should have kept running. That was what Joel wanted, but I couldn't. I turned around. The creature had Joel lifted completely off the ground. Its jaw had unhinged like a snake's, stretching impossibly wide. Joel wasn't screaming anymore. The thing's eyes, those horrible human eyes, met mine over my cousin's body. And then it smiled. I ran again. Somehow, through blind panic and pure luck, I found my way back to the RV. I fumbled with the keys, nearly dropping them twice before managing to get inside. I locked every door, closed every window, and huddled in the back trying to muffle my sobs. Hours passed. Night fell. Occasionally I heard that sound again, sometimes close, sometimes far away. Around midnight something scratched at the RV's roof. A long, slow scratch that lasted nearly an hour. I sat perfectly still, barely breathing, until dawn. The Rangers found me the next morning. I was still in the RV, clutching Joel's satellite phone. They said I was in shock, barely coherent. When I told them what happened, they exchanged those looks I've become familiar with, concern mixed with disbelief. The search for Joel lasted 5 days. They found his body 3 miles from where I'd last seen him, in a part of the forest that didn't match any of their maps. The official report cited an animal attack, probably a bear. They focused on the parts of his injuries that fit that narrative and ignored the rest, the impossible angles of the trauma, the strange marks that didn't match any known predator. I attended the funeral in Colorado. Joel's parents were kind to me, said it wasn't my fault. His mother hugged me and told me she was glad at least one of us made it back. I didn't tell them what really happened. How could I? The truth would only add to their pain. That was 3 weeks ago. I'm back in Kansas City now, trying to rebuild some semblance of normalcy. I went back to work, but I couldn't focus. The fluorescent lights and humming computers felt surreal after what I'd experienced. I kept seeing things in my peripheral vision, long limbs disappearing around corners, shadows moving against the laws of physics. I've started seeing a therapist. Dr. Chen is patient and understanding, even when I talk about things that can't possibly be real. She says trauma can manifest in many ways, that the mind sometimes creates monsters to make sense of terrible events. I nod and agree, but I know what I saw. The worst part isn't the nightmares, though they're bad enough. It's the questions that keep me awake at night. Why did it let me live? Was it simply not hungry anymore after Joel? Or was there something else? Some purpose I can't understand. I've done research since coming back, spent countless hours online looking for similar stories. There are more than you'd think. Hikers gone missing in national forests, bodies found in impossible places, strange sounds in the deep woods. Most can be explained away, some can't. Last week, I received a package from the Virginia State Police. Joel's personal effects. Among them was his camera, somehow intact. I haven't looked at the photos yet. The memory card sits on my desk like a live grenade, waiting to be opened. Part of me wants to know if he captured any evidence of what we saw. A bigger part of me is afraid he did. I'm writing this all down now because I need someone to know the truth. The real truth, not the sanitized version in the police reports or the rationalized version my therapist prefers. I need someone to understand that there are things in this world that defy explanation, things that hide in the spaces between what we know and what we fear. Joel was right about one thing. Nature demands respect. But what we encountered wasn't nature. It was something else. Something that wore nature like a costume. Used the forest as its stage, and it's still out there. Sometimes late at night I hear that sound again. Not in the city, not really, but in my memory. And when I do, I remember those eyes. Human eyes in an impossible face. Eyes that knew me, understood me, and chose to let me live with this story. I won't be going back to the forest, not ever. But I worry that somehow, someday, the forest might come looking for me. Because the thing about monsters isn't that they exist, it's that they remember you. Yesterday I received a letter from the Jefferson National Forest Service. They're closing the Devil's Backbone Trail indefinitely, due to environmental concerns. The official reason cites erosion and unstable ground conditions, but attached to the notice was a handwritten note from one of the rangers who found me. Stay away from the woods, Mr. Jenks. Some trails aren't meant to be walked. I burned the note, but I keep the ashes on my desk. A reminder that somewhere between the world we know and the world we fear, there are things that wait in the darkness. Things with human eyes and inhuman smiles. Things that let you live, just so you can tell their story. And now you know it too. My name is David Thompson. What I'm about to tell you happened to me on March 14th, 2000. It's funny how you can go through life thinking you've seen it all, done it all, only to find yourself face to face with something that makes you question everything you thought you knew. I was a ranger in Yosemite National Park, had been for almost 10 years. In that time, I'd seen my fair share of strange and scary situations, bear encounters, lost and injured hikers, even a run-in with a mountain lion once, but nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared me for what I encountered that fateful spring day. It started like any other shift. I clocked in at the ranger station, checked my gear, and set out on patrol. The morning was crisp and clear, the kind of day that draws visitors to Yosemite in droves. I was on the Mist Trail, a popular but challenging hike that winds past Vernal and Nevada Falls. It's a beautiful trek, but the steep granite stairs and slick mist from the waterfalls make it treacherous if you're not careful. I was about halfway up the trail when the call came over my radio. A hiker was missing, a young woman who had set out alone earlier that morning. It wasn't unusual. People got lost or injured in the park all the time. I figured she had probably just taken a wrong turn, or maybe twisted an ankle. I noted my location and headed back down the trail to begin the search. I found her backpack first, lying neatly at the base of Vernal Fall like it had been deliberately set down. That struck me as odd right away. If she had fallen or gotten lost, why would her pack be placed so carefully? I unzipped it, rifled through the contents. Water bottle, trail mix, first aid kit, all the usual day hike essentials. Nothing seemed out of place. But then, as I was closing the pack, I noticed something on the ground nearby, a dark spot on the light gray granite. I moved closer, crouched down to examine it. It was blood, still tacky to the touch. My unease grew as I scanned the surrounding area and spotted more drops leading away from the trail into the dense forest that flanked the waterfall. I grabbed my radio, called it in, told them I had found signs of a possible injury and was following a blood trail off the main path. Then, with a deep breath to steel my nerves, I began tracking the spatters deeper into the trees. The forest grew thicker as I moved further from the falls, the sunlight filtering weakly through the dense canopy. An unnatural hush seemed to blanket the woods, the usual chirps and chitters of wildlife eerily absent. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig under my boots sounded unnaturally loud. The blood trail grew heavier, more erratic, and a cold dread began to pool in my gut. This was more than a simple fall or twisted ankle. Something very wrong had happened to this hiker. I loosened my sidearm in its holster, just in case. Park rangers are trained for a lot of scenarios, but we're not law enforcement. Dealing with potential violent crime wasn't something I had much experience with. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, I stepped into a small clearing and stopped dead in my tracks. I had found the hiker, or rather what was left of her. She was sprawled in the center of the clearing, limbs akimbo in unnatural angles. Her clothing was shredded, soaked a dark glistening red, and the wounds, dear God, the wounds. Deep, savage gashes crisscrossed her body, flesh and muscle torn asunder to expose glistening bone. Her face, I couldn't look at her face. It was barely recognizable as human. The coppery stench of blood hung thick in the air, underlaid with something else, something sickly sweet and rotten. The buzzing of flies was loud, almost deafening. I stumbled to the side, bracing myself against a tree as my stomach heaved. In all my years as a ranger, I had never seen anything like this. This wasn't just an animal attack. This was something else, something malevolent. With shaking hands, I radioed for backup and began the grim task of securing the scene. It didn't take long for the cavalry to arrive. More rangers, local police, even a few FBI agents. The shock and horror on their faces mirrored my own as they took in the gruesome tableau. We bagged the body, combed the scene for evidence, interviewed other hikers who had been on the trail that day, but there were no leads, no clues to what could have done this. The official line was that it must have been a bear, maybe one with rabies to explain the uncharacteristic savagery, but I knew that wasn't true. I had seen bear attacks. This was something different, something evil. In the days and weeks that followed, more hikers went missing. Always on the same trail, always with the same blood-soaked outcome when we found them. The attacks grew bolder, the mutilations more severe. Theories flew. A serial killer, a cult, even Bigfoot. But none seemed to fit. The Park Service closed the trail, posted warnings, stepped up patrols, but nothing seemed to help. The killings continued, each more horrific than the last. The press got wind of it, dubbed the unknown assailant, the Yosemite Ripper. Tourists stayed away in droves, the once bustling park now eerily empty. And through it all, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more going on. Something beyond a human killer. Call it intuition, call it a hunch, but my gut told me we were dealing with something unnatural. It all came to a head one night when I was on a solo patrol. The mist trail had been closed for weeks at this point, but we still monitored it regularly. I was hiking up the now familiar path, my flashlight beam cutting through the thick darkness when I heard it. A rustling in the underbrush, too large to be a squirrel or a raccoon. I swung my light toward the sound and felt my blood turn to ice in my veins. There, caught in the beam, were two eyes, but not the eyes of any animal I recognized. These were large, almost human in their shape and placement, and they glowed an eerie, iridescent green. As I watched, frozen with fear, the eyes rose up higher and higher until they were level with my own 6-foot frame. Then the thing stepped forward into the light, and I got my first good look at it. It was humanoid, but only in the barest sense of the word. Its limbs were long and thin, the joints bending at odd, unnatural angles. The skin was dark, with a shiny, almost insectoid quality to it. And the face, I couldn't tell if it even had a face, just a blank, featureless oval dominated by those terrifying eyes. I stumbled backward, fumbling for my sidearm with numb fingers. The thing watched me, head tilting in an almost curious manner. Then it opened its mouth, a dark gash splitting the lower half of its face, and let out a shriek that sent icy skitters down my spine. I had never heard a sound like that before, a high, keening wail that seemed to pierce straight into my brain. I don't remember drawing my gun. I don't remember aiming or pulling the trigger. But suddenly the night was split by the crack of gunfire, and the muzzle flash lit up the creature like a strobe. I emptied the entire clip, the shots echoing off the rock walls of the valley. But the thing didn't fall. It didn't even seem to register the bullets slamming into its body. It just stood there, those eyes boring into me, that shriek still ringing in my ears. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, it turned and melted back into the trees, leaving me alone in the dark with the acrid smell of gunpowder and my own hammering heart. I radioed for backup with a voice I barely recognized as my own, then collapsed against a boulder, my entire body shaking. What had I just seen? What had I just encountered? Every rational part of my mind rejected it, insisted there had to be some logical explanation, but deep down, in some primal corner of my psyche, I knew the truth. I had just come face to face with something out of a nightmare, something that shouldn't exist in the rational waking world. When backup arrived, I numbly went through the motions of explaining what I had seen. I could tell they didn't believe me, could see the looks exchanged when they thought I wasn't looking. Shock, trauma, maybe even a breakdown. That's what they were thinking. I didn't blame them. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, felt that bone-deep instinctual terror, I wouldn't have believed it either. They put me on administrative leave, ordered me to take some time, get my head straight. But I couldn't let it go. That thing was still out there. I knew it with a certainty that went beyond reason or logic. And I knew somehow that it was responsible for the deaths, the disappearances. I had to do something. I had to stop it. So I started digging. On my own time, off the record. I pored over every book, every scrap of local folklore and legend I could find. I talked to people, the ones who had lived in the valley for generations, who whispered stories of things in the woods, things that didn't have a name. And slowly, painstakingly, a picture began to emerge. The local tribes had legends, passed down through oral traditions, of creatures they called Pok-Onk-Nok, soul eaters. Tall, dark things that lurked in the shadows of the forest, that could take the shape of men or beasts. They were said to feed on human essence, to steal the breath from living lungs. Most considered them just myths, stories to scare children away from the woods at night. But some of the elders, the shamans, claimed they were real, that they had always been there, watching, waiting. Armed with this new knowledge, I went back to the park. I knew I couldn't do this through official channels. I'd be laughed out of the ranger station if I tried to tell them we were dealing with a mythological soul-eating monster. So I went in on my own, on my days off, hiking the trails and scouring the backcountry. I started to notice things. Signs that I had missed before, too, caught up in the human details of the case. Strange tracks in the mud, too long and narrow to be bear or mountain lion. Claw marks on trees, too high up to be from any animal I knew of. And always, that eerie oppressive silence in the woods, like all the creatures were holding their breath, hiding from something. I began to feel like I was being watched, like there were eyes on me every time I stepped off the main trails. I started carrying my gun, even on my days off, started sleeping with it under my pillow at the tiny cabin I rented at the edge of the park. The nightmares came then, vivid, terrifying dreams of being chased, being caught, being consumed by something vast and dark and unutterably ancient. I would wake up screaming, drenched in icy sweat, my heart pounding against my ribs like it wanted to escape. And then, one moonless night, I found it. Or rather, it found me. I was deep in the back country, miles from the nearest trail, following a hunch, a gut feeling that had led me to a remote canyon I had never explored before. The darkness was absolute, my headlamp the only light in a sea of shadows. I heard it before I saw it, that same skin-crawling shriek echoing off the sheer rock walls. I spun, my light frantically scanning the trees, the beam shaking with the tremors that racked my body. And there it was, perched on a boulder not 10 yards away. Those glowing green eyes seemed to float in the darkness, staring right through me. I froze, my mind going blank with sheer primal terror. It shifted, unfolding from its crouched position, and I saw that it was even taller than I remembered, its limbs grotesquely elongated. It took a step toward me, and suddenly, something snapped inside me. Some survival instinct kicked in, and I was moving, my legs pumping, running blindly through the forest. Branches whipped at my face, rocks turned under my boots, sending me sprawling. But I picked myself up, barely feeling the pain, and ran on. I could hear it behind me, crashing through the underbrush, that awful wail rising and falling like a siren. It was toying with me, I realized dimly. It could have caught me in an instant if it wanted to. This was a game to it. The hunt, the chase. I burst from the tree line, found myself at the edge of a sheer drop, a gully carved by spring meltwater. I skidded to a stop, pebbles rattling over the edge into the blackness below. I spun, my back to the void, and there it was, stalking out of the shadows of the trees. In the stark light of my headlamp, I could see the leathery texture of its skin, the way its jaw split into a serrated grin filled with needle-like teeth. It knew it had me trapped. I could see it in the way it slowly tilted its head, in the almost lazy way it reached for me. I scrabbled backwards, felt my heel hit the edge of the precipice. My mind raced, fragments of half-remembered prayers and pleas tumbling through my head. This was it. This was how I was going to die, torn apart by a nightmare creature in the middle of nowhere. And then, just as its clawed hand was about to close around my throat, the darkness behind it seemed to shift. A shadow detached itself from the deeper shadows of the trees, resolved into a human shape. A man, tall and lean, dressed in tattered camouflage with a bandana covering the lower half of his face. But it was his eyes that caught and held me, glinting in the darkness. They burned with a feral, almost fanatical light. He moved like a predator, all coiled grace and lethal intent, and in his hand he held a long, wicked-looking knife that gleamed like silver fire in the moonlight. The creature sensed him a split second before he attacked. It whirled with blurring speed, but the man was faster. He lunged, that shining blade flashing as it sliced into dark flesh. The creature shrieked, a sound of pain and fury, and lashed out with its claws. But the man seemed to flow around the slashing talons like smoke, his knife finding its mark again and again. They battled back and forth across the small clearing, a dance of death and violence that was both terrifying and strangely beautiful. The creature was stronger, faster, but the man had skill and a ferocity that seemed to match the beast's own savagery. I watched, frozen, hardly daring to breathe. It seemed to go on forever, that primal clash of fang and blade. But in reality, it was over in a matter of moments. The man ducked under a slashing claw, came up inside the creature's guard, and with a swift, almost surgically precise motion, buried his knife to the hilt in the thing's neck. The creature staggered back, black ichor gushing from the wound. It clawed at the hilt protruding from its throat, its shrieks turning to guttural, liquid gurgles. The man watched impassively as it thrashed and twitched, as the light in those terrible eyes finally dimmed and went out. When it finally lay still, he stepped forward and yanked his blade free with a sickeningly wet sound. I must have made some noise then, some half-strangled gasp or whimper, because he whirled toward me, that gore-streaked knife coming up in a guard position. For a long, tense moment, we stared at each other, his burning eyes locked on my wide, shocked ones. Then, slowly, he lowered the knife. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice a raspy growl. I found my voice, somehow. What was that thing? What the hell is going on?" He was silent for a long moment, just studying me. "Then you've seen them before." It wasn't a question. I nodded jerkily. "In the woods. And the bodies, the missing hikers." "Pog Nook," he said, and there was a weight to the words, a grim finality. "Soul Eaters. They've been here longer than we have, hunting us, feeding on us." My mind reeled, trying to process it. But how? Why hasn't anyone? People have. The ones who pay attention. The ones who know the old stories. He wiped his blade clean on his pant leg, sheathed it at his belt. "I've been tracking this one for months. It was a wily old thing. Thought it could feed here without being noticed. With all the tourists coming through. Just another missing hiker, another animal attack. But I knew." He turned then, started to walk away. I scrambled after him, my brain still spinning. "Wait! Who are you? How do you know all this?" He paused, looked back at me. In the stark shadows of his face, his eyes seemed to glow like embers. "My name is John Blackwood. I hunt them. The Soul Eaters, the things that lurk in the dark places. It's what I do. It's what I've always done." He must have seen the look on my face, the mixture of horror and fascination. "Trust me, kid. You don't want to know more. You don't want any part of this. Go back to your life, your job. Forget what you saw here tonight." With that, he turned and melted into the shadows, leaving me alone in the darkness with the cooling corpse of the creature. I wish I could say I took his advice. I wish I could say I went back to the ranger station, told some story about getting lost, and let the whole thing go, but I couldn't. That night changed me, fundamentally and irrevocably. It opened my eyes to a world I never knew existed, a world of shadows and nightmares and things that hungered for human souls. I quit my job the next day, spent the next few weeks holed up in my cabin, poring over every scrap of information I could find on the Pog Nook, on the other creatures that lurked at the edges of human knowledge. I became obsessed, consumed by the need to know, to understand. And then, one day, he showed up at my door. John Blackwood, looking just as grim and dangerous as he had that night in the woods. He didn't seem surprised to see the state I was in. The maps and articles pinned to every wall, the books piled on every surface. "I knew you wouldn't let it go," he said, his voice tinged with something that might have been regret. "I saw it in your eyes that night, the hunger, the need to know." I just stared at him, my heart pounding. "What do you want?" He held my gaze, and there was a weight to his words, a gravity that seemed to pull at my very soul. "I want to teach you, to show you how to hunt, how to fight, because there are more of them out there, and someone needs to stand against the darkness." I knew I should say no. I knew I should slam the door in his face, go back to my research, my obsession. But some part of me, some deep primal part, leapt at his words. This was what I was meant to do. This was my calling. I nodded, slowly. "Teach me." And so began my new life. John took me under his wing, showed me things I never could have imagined. How to track the creatures, how to fight them. The old ways, the secret ways. It was grueling, brutal work, but I threw myself into it with a fervor that bordered on madness. This was my purpose now, my mission. We traveled the country, following the trail of strange disappearances, of whispered legends and half-forgotten myths. We fought things that had no name, things that had haunted the nightmares of humanity since the dawn of time. We lost friends, allies, parts of ourselves. But we never stopped, never gave up. Years passed. I grew older, harder, more scarred in both body and soul. But I never lost sight of my purpose, of the vow I had taken that night in the woods, to stand against the darkness, to protect the innocent from the things that lurked in the shadows. And now, as I sit here in this dingy motel room, cleaning my weapons and preparing for another hunt, I know that I will never stop. This is my life, my calling. Until my last breath, I will fight for the lost, for the fallen, for the ones who can't fight for themselves. My name is David Thompson. I am a hunter of monsters, a guardian at the gates of nightmare. And as long as I live, the darkness will never claim another soul.